Judge Caprio defends nurse who saved 5 lives at accident. The Oakpanold courtroom of the Providence Municipal Court was buzzing with the usual weekday murmur: citizens flipping through papers, lawyers whispering strategy, parents trying to keep restless children quiet. A small placard on the front bench read in gold letters on Frank Caprio. Chief Judge, Judge Caprio, sat at the bench, reading through the morning docket. For decades, he had listened to stories behind the city's petty violations, parking fines, speeding tickets, late fees, yet every now and then, a case would remind him why he believed in compassionate justice. Next case, called the bailiff, Officer Doyle, in a crisp voice. Case number 58,721, Sarah Johnson, handicapped parking violation. The doors creaked open. A young woman in a wrinkled blue hospital uniform stepped forward. Her dark hair was pinned in a loose bun, strands falling against a pale, tired face. Her ID badge, Sarah Johnson, RN, St. Mary Hospital, swung gently as she walked. _forward_ I asked them. Pause. Some people in the room turned to whisper. They recognized her. That's her, murmured an older woman sitting in the back. That's the nurse from the accident on I-95 last week. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she approached the stand. Behind her stood another woman in the same uniform, Lisa Martinez, pediatric nurse and Sarah's closest friend. Lisa gave her an encouraging nod. Judge Caprio glanced at the file before him, then looked over his glasses at Sarah. Miss Johnson, you are charged with parking your vehicle in a handicapped space on Waterfront Drive, April 23rd, at approximately 5:45 p.m. How do you plead? Sarah drew in a shaky breath. Guilty, Your Honor, but please, I'd like to explain what happened that day. Caprio nodded. Go ahead, Miss Johnson. Take your time. Sarah exhaled slowly, steadying her voice. I had just finished a 14-hour shift in the emergency room at St. Mary's. Was supposed to be 12, but 2 trauma cases came in back-to-back: heart attacks, a difficult delivery, and an accident victim from I was exhausted. I remember thinking I couldn't wait to shower and sleep. She paused, swallowing hard. On my drive home, along Waterfront Drive, I saw brake lights up ahead. Cars had stopped. Then I saw it, a 5-car It looked bad. I pulled over immediately. Judge Caprio leaned forward, elbows on the bench. And that's when you parked in the handicapped space? Yes, Your Honor. It was the only spot close enough to reach the scene safely. There was smoke, debris, glass everywhere. I didn't think about parking rules. I only thought people might be dying right there in front of me. Her voice quivered slightly, but she continued. The first car had a young couple inside, a pregnant woman and her husband. The husband was unconscious, bleeding from his head. The woman was panicking, screaming that she couldn't breathe and thought she was going into labor. I told her I was a nurse, tried to calm her down, and started first aid. She clasped her hands together, recalling every detail. I stopped the man's bleeding, stabilized his neck, and helped the woman control her breathing so she wouldn't deliver prematurely. Then I moved to the next car, an elderly couple. The woman was showing signs of a heart attack. I got her to chew an aspirin from my kit and kept her conscious until paramedics arrived. The courtroom was silent now. Sarah's eyes shimmered, but she fought the tears. There were 5 cars, Your Honor. 5. I helped everyone I could. I stayed until the EMTs got there and gave them full reports on each patient, names, vitals, what I'd done. By the time I went back to my car, there was a ticket on the windshield. Judge Caprio studied her for a moment. You stayed to save lives and came back to find a citation. Do you have any documentation to verify you were assisting at the accident? Sarah nodded and handed a folder to the bailiff. a letter from Providence EMS, signed by Chief Paramedic Robert Torres, and a second letter from one of the survivors. Caprio unfolded the first letter. He read it carefully, lips moving slightly. It says here that your professional intervention saved at least 2 lives that day. Yes, Your Honor, Sarah said softly. One was the pregnant woman's husband. He had severe head trauma. The other was an elderly woman having a heart attack. I didn't think about the ticket. I just reacted. Lisa, sitting quietly behind Sarah, raised her hand. Your Honor, may I speak? Go ahead, Miss. Lisa Martinez, pediatric nurse, St. Mary Hospital. Sarah is one of the most selfless nurses I know. During COVID, she worked 70-hour weeks, stayed in a hotel so she wouldn't infect her parents. She's the kind of person who gives everything to her patients. Please understand, she's not here to avoid paying a fine. She's here because this ticket could cost her everything. Caprio's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Sarah's voice shook. At my hospital, there's a 3-strike policy. If an employee gets 3 traffic tickets, they can be terminated for failure to maintain public responsibility. This would be my 3rd. The judge blinked in disbelief. You could lose your job over parking tickets. Yes, Your Honor, my first ticket was 3 years ago. I was rushing blood plasma to the ER for a critical patient. I was speeding. The second was last year. I failed to make a complete stop after a night shift. I was exhausted. Caprio scribbled something in his notes, then looked up. And this would be the 3rd strike. Sarah nodded. If the hospital fires me, I'll lose my license, eligibility, and health benefits. Nursing is my life, Your Honor. It's not just a job. Her voice cracked slightly at the end. Lisa squeezed her shoulder. The judge flipped through the hospital policy Sarah provided. 3 traffic violations. Termination may result. He shook his head. That's quite a policy. Sarah lowered her gaze. It's meant to uphold public trust, sir. But in this case, I wasn't being irresponsible. I was saving people. Before Judge Caprio could respond, a voice came from the back of the courtroom. Your Honor, may I say something? All heads turned. A man with a bandage on his forehead stood up, supported by a pregnant woman beside him. They walked slowly to the front. State your name, Caprio said kindly. Michael Torres, Your Honor. My wife, Jennifer, and I were in that accident. Miss Johnson saved both our lives and our babies. Jennifer, visibly in her 3rd trimester, nodded tearfully. She kept me calm when I thought I was losing the baby. She stopped my husband's bleeding. Without her, I don't think either of us would be here today. Michael pulled a photo from his jacket and handed it to the bailiff. This is our son, Jason. He was born the next day. We gave him the middle name Sarah for her. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even Caprio blinked back emotion. He's a beautiful child, he said softly. Michael's voice shook. Your Honor, I understand. Rules are rules. But this woman broke none that matter. She gave everything she had that day. Please, don't let her lose her job because she did what was right. As the couple stepped aside, another voice rose, frail but firm. Your Honor, my name's George Wilson. My wife Ruth was in that same crash. An elderly man wheeled his wife forward. Ruth smiled weakly, her hands trembling on the armrests. She had a heart attack that day, George continued. Sarah pulled her out, gave her aspirin, kept her alive until the ambulance came. Doctors said it saved her heart from permanent damage. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. She came to me like an angel. Your Honor, I'd already said my goodbyes in my head, but she wouldn't let me go. The courtroom was now filled with murmurs, sniffles, and even quiet sobs. Then, a third voice called out. I was there too. A man in his 40s limped forward with 3 children by his side. Richard Williams, he said. I was trapped in my car that day. internal bleeding. She climbed halfway inside through the glass to keep me conscious. My kids still have a father because of her. His eldest son, about 12, stepped closer to the judge. Miss Johnson is a superhero, Your Honor. Real superheroes don't wear capes. That broke the courtroom's composure. Several people wiped tears openly. Judge Caprio looked from Sarah to the witnesses, a pregnant woman, an elderly couple, 3 fatherless children who weren't fatherless after all. He adjusted his glasses, voice quiet but steady. Miss Johnson, he said, I've heard many stories in this courtroom, excuses, regrets, a few tragedies. But rarely have I heard a story like yours. You didn't just save lives. You gave people hope. You parked in that handicapped spot, not out of disregard for the law, but out of respect for life. He paused, letting the silence settle. I'm dismissing this case completely. Gasps, then applause. Sarah covered her mouth, tears streaming freely. Caprio raised a hand to calm the crowd. And furthermore, I'll be writing a formal letter to St. Mary Hospital, explaining your actions and advising the board to review that 3-strike policy. It's unjust for a rule meant to protect the public to punish someone for saving lives. The courtroom erupted again, this time not in applause but in a standing ovation. Even the bailiff smiled. Sarah turned to see Lisa crying and clapping. The survivors hugged her one by one. Jennifer, Ruth, Richard, and even little James. Caprio's gavel struck softly. Case dismissed, Miss Johnson, and thank you for reminding us what humanity looks like. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps. Word had spread quickly. Judge Caprio defends nurse who saved 5 lives. Cameras flashed as Sarah stood awkwardly beside Lisa, overwhelmed by the attention. Miss Johnson, how does it feel to have your case go viral? One reporter shouted. Sarah blinked. Honestly, I just want to go back to work. My patients need me. That evening, a clip from the courtroom aired on local news. By midnight, it had hit 500,000 views on social media. The headline read, Nurse who saved 5 lives, forgiven for parking ticket, judge's compassion wins hearts, nationwide. Underneath, comments poured in by the thousands. This woman deserves a medal. Finally, justice that feels human. Judge Caprio restores my faith in people. But while the internet celebrated, Sarah sat quietly in her small apartment, her nurse's bag still by the door. She watched the clip once, then turned off the TV. She couldn't quite believe what had happened. The next morning, her phone rang. Sarah Johnson, yes, speaking. This is Mayor Thomas Keating. I'd like to personally meet with you tomorrow. Providence owes you a thank you. Sarah froze. Mr. Mayor, yes, we're organizing a small ceremony at City Hall. Please say you'll come. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. Of course, sir, thank you. As she hung up, she looked out the window at the city she'd served for 7 years, the same city where, just 2 days ago, she'd feared losing her job. Now, strangers were calling her a hero. She didn't feel like one. She just felt human. The sun had barely risen over Providence when Sarah Johnson pulled her car into the parking lot of St. Mary Hospital. It was her first shift since the courtroom hearing, and the cool morning air smelled faintly of rain and spring blossoms. News cameras had been parked outside the hospital entrance since dawn, waiting for her. Miss Johnson, Sarah, how does it feel to be a hero? Shouted one reporter as she got out of her car. Another called, will you be attending the ceremony with the mayor today? Sarah forced a polite smile and waved briefly, before ducking inside the automatic doors. She wasn't used to cameras. She was used to 4 drips, alarms, and the faint hum of life monitors. Lisa Martinez caught up with her inside the hallway, still in her pink pediatric scrubs. Girl, you're famous. My cousin in New Jersey texted me this morning, said, You're on CNN. Sarah rolled her eyes with a tired grin. Please don't remind me. I just want a normal day. Lisa laughed. Normal doesn't exist for you anymore. You're officially Providence's angel nurse. Sarah groaned. They really called me that. Lisa handed her a coffee cup. Front page of the Providence Herald. The photos from court when Caprio dismissed the ticket. You look like you're about to cry. I was about to cry. They walked together toward the ER. The smell of antiseptic and coffee filling the air. Nurses waved at her. Some clapped. Even the security guard gave a thumbs up. Inside the break room, a group of doctors were huddled around a tablet, watching a replay of the viral clip, and furthermore, Judge Caprio's voice echoed from the video. This court dismisses the charge entirely. Thank you, Miss Johnson, for reminding us what humanity looks like. Dr. Peterson, the head of the ER, looked up as Sarah entered. Well, if it isn't our local celebrity. Sarah flushed. Please, don't. But he smiled warmly. You made us proud, Sarah. Not just this hospital, this entire city. Across the room, the television was showing a national morning show segment. The nurse who saved lives and justice, a reporter narrated, the internet is calling her the Angel of Providence. Sarah Johnson, a 29-year-old ER nurse, risked her job when she stopped to save victims of a car crash. Her case was dismissed by Judge Frank Caprio in a powerful moment of compassion. Lisa pointed at the screen. You're trending, Sarah. 500,000 people watched it overnight. Sarah exhaled. I didn't do it for attention. I just couldn't drive past that scene. Lisa nodded gently. That's exactly why everyone loves you. Later that afternoon, Sarah stood outside City Hall in a neat navy dress, her hair tied back, her nurse's badge clipped to her purse. Mayor Thomas Keating waited on the steps, smiling warmly as she approached. Cameras flashed as he extended his hand. Miss Johnson, thank you for coming. It's an honor to meet you, he said. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm still trying to process all this. Well, he chuckled. You'll have to process one more thing. He motioned for her to follow him inside. In the council chamber, city officials and press gathered. A small stage had been set up, with an American flag behind the podium. Mayor Keating stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, today we honor a citizen whose actions remind us of the best of humanity. On April 23rd, during a multiple car accident on Interstate 95, Nurse Sarah Johnson stopped on her way home from work and saved the lives of 5 people. Applause erupted. Sarah shifted nervously on her feet. Keating continued, for her bravery, compassion, and selflessness, the City of Providence awards her the Medal of Civil Heroism, our highest civilian honor. An officer stepped forward and pinned the medal to Sarah's dress. The bright silver emblem glimmered under the white lights. Cameras clicked furiously. Sarah's voice trembled as she approached the microphone. Thank you. I don't feel like a hero. I did what any nurse or doctor would have done. We're trained to help, no matter where we are. But that day reminded me human life is precious, and compassion shouldn't have limits. She glanced toward the crowd. In the front row, she saw the Torres family, Michael and Jennifer, holding their baby. Jason, next to them, Ruth and George Wilson smiled proudly. Richard Williams was there too, leaning on a cane, with his children waving at her. Sarah smiled through tears. If I did something good that day, it's because of the people who taught me compassion, my patients, my colleagues, and every person in this city who believes doing the right thing still matters. The room erupted in applause again, louder this time, longer. After the ceremony, reporters swarmed her once more. Miss Johnson, how does it feel to receive the city's highest honor? Do you think Judge Caprio's decision was fair? Would you support a new law protecting good Samaritans like you? Sarah blinked against the flash of cameras. I think Judge Caprio's decision wasn't just fair, it was humane. And if this story changes even one law, or helps one person stop and help another, then it's all worth it." Mayor Keating added beside her, "In fact, we're already drafting an ordinance, the Good Samaritan Traffic Protection Act. It will prevent anyone from being punished for a parking or traffic infraction committed while providing emergency aid." The crowd cheered. For a moment, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. But not everyone at St. Mary Hospital was celebrating. Inside a glass-walled conference room on the hospital's top floor, 3 members of the executive board were meeting. CEO Dr. Margaret Phillips, HR Director Linda Henderson, and Legal Counsel Robert Mills. On the table lay a folder labeled Employee Disciplinary Policy, Section 8.3, Conduct and Public Responsibility. Linda Henderson spoke first. "Technically, we're still obligated to review the ticket under the 3-strike policy." Dr. Phillips frowned. "You can't be serious, Linda. The entire country just watched her save 5 lives." "I'm aware," Henderson replied evenly. "But the policy applies equally to all employees. If we make an exception, it opens the door for others to challenge HR precedent." Mills cleared his throat. However, the mayor's letter, along with Judge Caprio's formal recommendation, would make termination legally problematic. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly on her side. Phillips folded her arms. "Then maybe it's time to review the policy itself. It was written to prevent negligence, not punish heroism." Linda sighed. "The board can call an emergency meeting, but policy changes require majority approval." "Then call it," said Phillips firmly. "I won't let this hospital's reputation be tarnished for punishing a nurse who did the right thing." Meanwhile, Sarah returned home that evening exhausted but grateful. Her apartment was small, a cozy 1-bedroom with soft light and a shelf lined with medical books and family photos. When she walked in, her answering machine light blinked. She pressed play. "Sarah, it's Judge Caprio. I just wanted to tell you the city's proud of you. I meant what I said in court. The law should have a heart. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for doing what's right." Sarah smiled softly, wiping her eyes. "Thank you, Judge," she whispered. She sank onto her couch, medal still pinned to her chest. The television flickered with her own face on the evening news, but she barely noticed. All she could think about were the people she'd met that day, the lives that continued because of a split-second decision. The next morning, the hospital lobby was filled with flowers, letters, and cards from people all over the country. Some read, "Thank you for reminding us that good still exists." From a nurse in Texas, "You made us proud." For Sarah, a true hero in scrubs. Lisa stood beside her, mouth open. "Holy moly, you're basically the Taylor Swift of healthcare." Sarah laughed nervously. "Please, don't say that out loud." Dr. Phillips approached them, smiling. "Miss Johnson, my office, please." Sarah followed, heart pounding. Inside, Dr. Phillips gestured for her to sit. "Sarah, first of all, congratulations. You've brought tremendous honor to this hospital." "Thank you, ma'am. I was just doing my job." Dr. Phillips leaned forward. "We've received Judge Caprio's letter. He described you as the living definition of civic virtue. The board is meeting tomorrow to review the 3-strike policy. I intend to propose its removal." Sarah blinked. "You mean the policy that could have gotten me fired?" Phillips nodded. "Yes, it's outdated and unjust. And if we succeed, it'll be because of you." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again. "Thank you, Dr. Phillips." That night, news spread that St. Mary Hospital was holding an emergency board meeting to review its employee conduct policy. The public began rallying online under the hashtag #StandWithSarah. Within hours, it became a trending topic nationwide. Celebrities tweeted support. Nurses from across the country shared stories of saving lives off duty and facing penalties for it. One viral tweet read, "If helping people puts your job at risk, the system is broken." #StandWith. At 9 a.m. the next day, the board meeting began. Cameras weren't allowed, but journalists waited outside. Inside the sleek conference room, Dr. Phillips stood before the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, our nurse Sarah Johnson has become the face of compassion and courage. Yet our policy would have punished her for it. That is unacceptable." Linda Henderson, her voice steady but softer than before, said, "Public pressure aside, we must do what's ethically right. I've reviewed the incident myself. Miss Johnson's behavior was not reckless, it was heroic. I support amending the policy." The room murmured in agreement. Robert Mills added, "Given the mayor's commendation and the hospital's reputation, revising this rule is both morally and strategically necessary." Phillips raised her hand. "Then let's vote." Every hand went up. Unanimous. The three-strike policy was abolished. From now on, any hospital employee who committed a minor infraction while responding to an emergency would be exempt. They named the new initiative the Sarah Johnson Emergency Response Program. When Sarah arrived for her next shift, the staff was waiting with confetti and applause. Dr. Phillips stood on the counter and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, meet the inspiration behind our new program. From this day forward, any St. Mary employee who acts in the interest of saving lives will have full institutional protection. Let this serve as our promise: compassion first, paperwork second." The nurses cheered. Lisa hugged her tightly. "You did it, Sarah. You actually changed a policy." Sarah laughed through tears. "I didn't do anything alone. Judge Caprio, the mayor, you guys, we all did this." That evening, as she left the hospital, Sarah saw the sunset reflecting over the Providence River, the same road where it had all begun. Cars drove by peacefully, no wreckage, no chaos, just calm. She pulled over at the same spot she'd parked that fateful day, the handicapped space now marked with a small plaque. She stepped out and read it aloud, tears welling in her eyes. "In honor of Nurse Sarah Johnson, who reminded us that compassion is the highest form of justice." She smiled softly. A moment later, her phone buzzed with a text from Judge Caprio. "Judge Caprio, heroes don't need permission to do what's right. Proud of you, Sarah." She typed back, "Sarah, thank you, Judge. I'll keep doing my job." Then she stood there quietly. 2 weeks after Judge Caprio's ruling, Providence was still buzzing about Sarah Johnson. Her story had grown beyond the small courtroom where it began. It had become a movement. Television anchors described her as the nurse who turned justice into kindness. Newspapers ran headlines like, "From parking ticket to policy change." And on social media, the hashtag Good Heart Law began trending. It started when a law professor at Brown University, Dr. Patrick Elwell, shared a tweet. "If a nurse can lose her job for saving lives, it's time for Rhode Island to update its laws. We need a Good Samaritan protection act that includes traffic and civic exceptions." Within days, the tweet had over 1 million likes. Legislators began to take notice. On a crisp Wednesday morning, a crowd gathered outside the marble steps of the State House. Cameras, reporters, nurses, and even students carrying signs that read, "Compassion isn't a crime," filled the courtyard. Inside, State Representative Monica Alvarez was about to propose a new bill. The Good Samaritan Extended Protection Act, inspired by Sarah Johnson's case. The bill would exempt individuals who commit minor infractions while rendering emergency aid from penalties, as long as their actions were reasonable and in good faith. Representative Alvarez stepped to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah Johnson's story moved millions because it reminded us that the law must have humanity. This bill ensures that compassion will never again be punished. The audience erupted in applause. Sarah sat in the front row beside her friend Lisa and Judge Caprio himself, who had been invited as a guest of honor. When Alvarez called Sarah to speak, she froze momentarily. She wasn't a public speaker. She was a nurse who still worked night shifts and paid off student loans. But as she approached the microphone, her nerves faded. "I never imagined I'd stand here in front of lawmakers," she began softly. "I'm not a politician or a lawyer. I'm just someone who saw people in danger and couldn't look away." Her voice trembled slightly. "That day, I didn't think about laws or tickets. I thought about a pregnant woman who might lose her baby, an elderly couple who needed help, and a man who couldn't breathe. I did what any nurse, any human being, would do." She looked toward Judge Caprio, who gave her a reassuring nod. "I believe in laws, Your Honor," she continued, "but I also believe the law should protect kindness, not punish it, because sometimes doing the right thing means breaking a rule." The chamber filled with applause, standing ovations echoing across the marble walls. The hearing went viral overnight. News networks replayed Sarah's speech, calling it one of the most moving testimonies in years. CNN ran a headline: "Nurses' Courage Inspires Lawmakers to Protect Everyday Heroes." NBC's morning show featured Judge Caprio and Sarah in a live interview. The host smiled warmly. "Judge, your courtroom decision has become a national conversation about the balance between justice and humanity. Did you ever imagine it would go this far?" Caprio chuckled. "I didn't. I just followed what my heart told me was right. But if this case teaches us anything, it's that empathy is contagious." Then the host turned to Sarah, and "Sarah, millions of Americans are calling you a hero. How do you respond to that?" Sarah blushed, hands folded in her lap. "I don't feel like a hero. I'm just someone who got lucky enough to help at the right moment. The real heroes are all around us: nurses, EMTs, teachers, parents. They just don't always make the news." The segment ended with the audience giving them both a standing ovation. Back at St. Mary Hospital, the effects of Sarah's story continued to ripple. The Sarah Johnson Emergency Response Program had officially launched, providing training, mental health support, and financial aid for hospital staff who assisted in off-duty emergencies. The hospital even established a small fund to cover parking or traffic fines incurred during such acts of aid. Dr. Margaret Phillips addressed the media at a press conference. "Sarah's compassion didn't just save lives, it changed our institution. This program will ensure no nurse, doctor, or staff member ever has to choose between doing what's right and keeping their job." Sarah stood beside her, humbled. Reporters asked, "Miss Johnson, what's next for you?" She smiled faintly. "I'm going back to work. That's where I belong." One afternoon, Sarah was on her lunch break when her phone rang. "Sarah Johnson." "Yes, speaking. This is Mayor Keating again. The governor's office just called. They're inviting you to the state assembly signing ceremony next week." The bill passed both houses unanimously. Sarah's hand froze midair, the sandwich forgotten. "You mean it's official?" "It will be, once the governor signs it. And they want you to hold the pen with him." Sarah covered her mouth, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say." "Say yes." The mayor laughed. "You've earned it." The Rhode Island State Assembly was packed. Lawmakers, media, and ordinary citizens filled the chamber. Governor Ellen Whitmore, a tall woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, stood at the podium beside Sarah and Judge Caprio. "This law the governor began, is about more than traffic or fines. It's about recognizing that sometimes, in moments of crisis, the human heart must take precedence over bureaucracy. Nurse Sarah Johnson reminded us that compassion is not an act of defiance. It is the foundation of civilization. She turned to Sarah. Miss Johnson, would you do me the honor of signing this with me? Sarah nodded, her hands shaking slightly as she held the pen. Together, they signed the Good Samaritan Extended Protection Act into law. Cameras flashed as the room erupted in cheers. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah took a breath. This law isn't about me, she said softly. It's about every person who's ever stopped on the side of the road, every nurse who's worked past exhaustion, every stranger who's said, I can help. You don't need a uniform to be a hero. You just need a heart that cares. Judge Caprio stepped forward and whispered, Well said, Miss Johnson. The law finally caught up with your heart. News of the new law spread nationwide. Other states began drafting similar legislation. California proposed its own version within a month. Florida and Texas soon followed. The federal government even released a statement commending Rhode Island for setting a precedent in humane justice. Editorials called it the law of compassion. CNN's headline read, A nurse, a judge, and a new kind of justice. Sarah's story had become a beacon, proof that ordinary people could change systems. Meanwhile, Michael and Jennifer Torres, the couple from the accident, wanted to do something more than thank Sarah. They founded the Jason Sarah Torres Emergency Response Foundation, named after their newborn son and the nurse who saved him. At the launch event, Michael spoke to a crowd of donors and medical professionals. When I opened my eyes that day, I thought it was the end, but I saw her face first, calm, focused, determined. Because of her, I'm here to see my son grow up. This foundation will help train and support others who step up in emergencies, just like she did. Sarah, standing nearby, wiped her eyes as Jennifer added, Every grant, every scholarship we give will carry Sarah's name, because she gave us the greatest gift of all, life. After the ceremony, Sarah walked alone through the city park. Autumn leaves crunched beneath her shoes. The chaos of the last few months had been overwhelming. Media appearances, speeches, policy meetings, but at her core, she was still the same nurse who checked vitals and held patients' hands during night shifts. She sat on a bench overlooking the river, the same river she'd driven past on that fateful day. Her phone buzzed. A message from Judge Caprio, You've done more good than you realize. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. She typed back, Thank you, Judge. I still can't believe all this happened because of a parking ticket. He replied a moment later, Sometimes justice begins with something small and grows because good people refuse to stay quiet. She smiled, locking her phone and gazing out at the water. A few weeks later, Dr. Phillips called Sarah into her office again. Sarah, I have good news, she said, beaming. Karen, our current head nurse, is retiring next month. She's personally recommended you for the position. Sarah froze. Me, head nurse? Yes, Phillips said. You've proven leadership, empathy, and courage. You've inspired our staff, and frankly, there's no one more qualified. Sarah blinked, speechless. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Phillips said warmly. The board already approved it. Sarah laughed, covering her face with her hands. I thank you, Dr. Phillips. I'll do my best. I know you will, Phillips said, smiling. You already have. That weekend, St. Mary Hospital hosted a community picnic to celebrate the launch of the new emergency response program. Families from the accident attended, the Torres family with baby Jason, Ruth and George Wilson, Richard Williams with his children, Maria Gonzalez and her daughter Sophia, and David Collins, now fully recovered, the event was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of barbecue. Balloons danced in the breeze as kids played on the grass. When it was time for speeches, Dr. Phillips took the microphone. Today, we celebrate the strength of this community, and one remarkable nurse who reminded us what humanity looks like. Sarah Johnson, please join me. The crowd cheered as Sarah stepped up. She looked around, smiling at all the faces she'd once seen bruised and broken, now healed, happy, alive. A year ago, she began, we met under terrible circumstances, but those moments gave birth to something beautiful. We've become more than patients and caregivers, we've become family. She turned toward little Jason in his mother's arms. This little boy reminds me that even from tragedy, life finds a way to bloom. Her voice softened. If I've learned anything, it's that kindness doesn't need permission. The world is full of people who care. Sometimes they just need a reminder that compassion still matters. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Even Judge Caprio, sitting quietly in the back with his signature warm smile, wiped away a tear. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah stood, surrounded by laughter and joy. The very people whose lives had once hung by a thread. Lisa came up beside her and whispered, "So, what's next for Providence's favorite nurse?" Sarah smiled, watching the children chase each other across the lawn. "Just more of the same," she said softly. "Helping people, that's what I was meant to do." That night, as she drove home, she passed the same stretch of waterfront drive. The city lights shimmered on the water. The sign by the curb now bore an inscription: "The Sarah Johnson Emergency Medical Center, in honor of courage, compassion, and the power of one heart." Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered to herself, "Sometimes the smallest act can change everything." A full year had passed since the day Sarah Johnson stood in Judge Caprio's courtroom, frightened, exhausted, and uncertain about her future. Now, as the new head nurse of St. Mary Hospital's emergency department, she walked through the ER doors every morning with quiet confidence. The white light above the nurses' station gleamed off the polished floors, and the once chaotic rhythm of her department now pulsed with organization and warmth. People greeted her not with awe anymore, but with familiarity, respect, wrapped in affection. "Morning, boss," said Lisa Martinez, carrying a clipboard. Sarah laughed softly. "You're never going to stop calling me that, are you?" "Nope, you earned it. Might as well enjoy it." She smiled, setting down her coffee. The nurses around her were preparing for shift change. Monitors beeped, stretchers rolled in, and the hum of the ER filled the air. But even in the noise, there was something different now: calmness, unity, and pride. Over the past year, Sarah had helped design new protocols for trauma response, organized mental health check-ins for staff, and started workshops on community first aid training. Every week, she taught a class called The First 5 Minutes, showing every day people how to handle emergencies until professionals arrived. It was sponsored by the Jason Sarah Torres Foundation. Her students included bus drivers, teachers, and even teenagers from the local high school. Each session ended with the same phrase Sarah always said: "You don't need a uniform to save a life. You just need to care enough to stop." In early summer, the city of Providence held a grand opening for the newly renovated Sarah Johnson Emergency Medical Center, a state-of-the-art wing funded by donations from people she'd once saved and countless strangers who were inspired by her story. The building gleamed in white marble and glass, reflecting the bright sky. The main lobby displayed a bronze plaque engraved with the words, "Dedicated to all who act with compassion before instruction. Inspired by Nurse Sarah Johnson, -2025. Sarah stood on stage next to the mayor, Dr. Phillips, and Judge Caprio, who had become a dear family friend. Mayor Keating took the podium first. 1 year ago, this city watched a story unfold that reminded us what true justice looks like. Today, we stand in the very place that story inspired. A space built not only for healing bodies, but also hearts. The crowd applauded. Dr. Phillips spoke next. Sarah, your courage changed more than hospital policy. You changed our perspective on what it means to serve. This building will carry your name for generations to come. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stepped up, heart pounding. I never imagined my name would be on a building, she said softly. All I ever wanted was to help people. But this, she gestured to the walls around her. This belongs to everyone who chooses kindness. Even when no one's watching. She paused, glancing at the crowd. In the front row sat the Torres family. Baby Jason, now toddling in his mother's arms. Ruth and George Wilson were there, smiling proudly. Richard Williams and his children waved. And it belongs to them, she added, pointing to the families she had saved, because they're the reason I stopped that day. Applause thundered through the room. Even Judge Caprio, seated near the stage, stood to clap. His proud, fatherly smile met hers across the crowd. By the end of that year, the Good Samaritan Extended Protection Act, the law inspired by her story, had been adopted in 14 states. Hospitals across the country had launched their own versions of the Sarah Johnson program, protecting healthcare workers who responded to off-duty emergencies. Time magazine featured her on their annual 100 People Changing the World list. Her photo, wearing her blue scrubs, holding a stethoscope and a small city medal, appeared beside the headline. The nurse who made justice human. When a journalist asked her what she thought about being called America's nurse, Sarah laughed and said, "I'm just Providence's nurse. That's more than enough." One evening, after finishing a 14-hour shift, Sarah returned to her apartment. The lights from the city glowed outside her window. A thick envelope sat on her kitchen counter. No return address, only her name. She opened it curiously. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Nurse Johnson, I'm a firefighter in Ohio. Last month, I was off duty when I saw a car flipped over on the highway. For a moment, I hesitated. I thought about the risks, my job, the rules. But then I remembered your story. I stopped. I pulled a teenage boy out before the car caught fire. The doctors said if I'd waited even one more minute, he wouldn't have made it. I just wanted you to know, you saved him, too. Sincerely, Mark Keller. Sarah sat down slowly, the letter trembling in her hands. Her eyes filled with tears. It wasn't the first letter she'd received like that, but every single one reminded her that compassion could ripple far beyond a single act. She framed that letter beside her hospital ID badge. Late one Friday night, the air buzzed with tension. A call had come in from the Providence Fire Department, a gas explosion downtown. Multiple casualties expected. Within minutes, ambulances flooded the bay. Smoke still clung to the air as injured civilians were rushed inside. Sarah's instincts kicked in. Get trauma rooms, 2 through 5, cleared. She shouted, oxygen, ready, IV lines, prepped, alert surgery. It was chaos, burns, lacerations, shock. The kind of chaos she'd trained her team for. She moved from patient to patient, directing, assisting, stabilizing. A paramedic burst in, soot covering his uniform. We have one more incoming firefighter. Mid-30s, critical burns, smoke, inhalation. Sarah turned. Bring him to trauma room 1. When they wheeled him in, her heart stopped. The patient's ID tag read, Keller, Mark. For a second, time froze. The same firefighter who'd written her that letter. Let's move, she commanded, regaining focus. For hours, she and her team fought to stabilize him. Fluids, intubation, graft prep, respiratory support, When his heart rhythm faltered, she didn't blink. "Don't you dare give up on me, Mark," she whispered, pressing on his chest. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his pulse returned. The room erupted in relieved murmurs. Sarah leaned back, drenched in sweat, tears in her eyes. "We got him." By dawn, the chaos had subsided. Sarah walked down the corridor, exhaustion pulling at her body. Mark lay in the recovery ward, hooked to oxygen but stable. When he opened his eyes, he whispered faintly, "You, again." Sarah smiled tiredly. "Looks like we're even now." He chuckled weakly. "Guess so." She nodded. "You're going to be fine. You saved lives last night." His voice rasped. "Only because you showed me how." Sarah's eyes softened. "No, Mark, you had it in you all along." The next day, reporters gathered outside St. Mary Hospital again, not for a courtroom drama this time, but for something far larger. The mayor stood at the podium with Sarah beside him. "Last night, our city faced tragedy, but also witnessed courage," Mayor Keating began. "Among those injured was firefighter Mark Keller, who saved 6 civilians before collapsing. The nurse who helped save his life was the very woman who inspired him to act." The audience gasped. Cameras flashed. Sarah looked down modestly. "He's the real hero," she said softly into the microphone. "I just did my job." Judge Caprio, who had come to support her, leaned over and whispered, "You keep saying that, but somehow, your job keeps saving the world." She laughed quietly. "Maybe I should start charging per miracle." In the following weeks, the explosion victims recovered, and the city rebuilt stronger than before. The incident made national news once again. "Nurse saves firefighter who once wrote to thank her." Editorials called it the circle of compassion. People sent letters from across the world. Teachers, veterans, mothers, even children, all sharing stories of how Sarah's courage inspired them to act in moments of fear. She read every one of them. Some she hung on her wall, others she stored in a wooden box labeled "Reminders of Why." A month later, Sarah received a letter from the American Red Cross. "Dear Miss Johnson, in recognition of your extraordinary contribution to humanity, we are honored to present you with the National Lifesaver Award. Actions have inspired a generation of healthcare professionals to serve with both skill and heart." At the ceremony in Washington, D.C., Sarah stood on stage before thousands. The audience was filled with first responders, military personnel, and volunteers. As she accepted the award, she looked out across the sea of uniforms and said, "You all do this every day, quietly, tirelessly. I just had a camera in the room when I did it. But if this spotlight means I can remind people that kindness is the strongest medicine we have, then it's worth it." The crowd gave her a standing ovation. Back in Providence, Sarah's life settled into a new normal, if such a thing existed for her anymore. She still worked night shifts, still drank too much coffee, still double-checked every chart. But every once in a while, a patient or visitor would recognize her and whisper, "You're that nurse." She'd smile, nod politely, and go back to work. Because, for Sarah, the real reward wasn't fame, it was the quiet heartbeat of a patient stabilizing, the sigh of relief from a family, the small miracles that happened daily behind hospital walls. One evening, Judge Caprio stopped by the hospital. He'd just retired after decades on the bench, and he wanted to see Sarah one more time. They met in the hospital garden, a peaceful space surrounded by blooming magnolias. "You did it, Sarah," he said warmly, holding her hand. "You turned a parking ticket into a national movement." She smiled. "You gave me a chance, Judge. You listened when others wouldn't." He chuckled. "Well, I suppose we both followed our hearts." He looked up at the plaque on the hospital wall bearing her name. "You've built quite a legacy for someone who once stood trembling in my courtroom." Sarah laughed softly. "I still tremble sometimes, but now it's usually because of caffeine." They both laughed. As the sun set, Caprio grew thoughtful. "You know, I always believed justice had two hands, one of the law and one of mercy. You reminded me they belong together." Sarah looked at him gratefully. "Thank you for teaching me that rules should never outweigh compassion." He nodded, smiling. "And thank you for proving it." That night, Sarah stayed a little longer at the hospital. She walked the quiet halls, checking on patients one last time before going home. When she reached the entrance, she stopped to look at the reflection of the hospital's name illuminated in soft white light. "The Sarah Johnson Emergency Medical Center," she whispered under her breath. "Not my name, our story." Then she turned, walking into the night, ready for whatever call for help might come next. The following winter blanketed Providence in soft, silver snow. Streets shimmered beneath streetlights, and the city seemed to rest after a year of triumphs, recoveries, and healing. Inside St. Mary Hospital's Emergency Medical Center, Sarah Johnson adjusted her scarf as she stepped in from the cold. Her shift had just ended, and she was heading home. It had been 2 years since the day that changed everything. 2 years since she'd stood trembling in Judge Caprio's courtroom. 2 years since 5 lives had hung in the balance. She was older now, not in years, but in wisdom. The medals, the interviews, the awards, they'd all faded into the background of her simple truth. Healing was her calling, not her spotlight. But even as the world called her a hero, Sarah was beginning to face a battle she couldn't mend with gauze or a defibrillator. Her father, Robert Johnson, had fallen ill. Robert Johnson had always been the quiet strength in Sarah's life, a retired firefighter who raised his daughter after her mother's death. He had taught her everything she knew about courage, empathy, and selflessness. When his diagnosis came, congestive heart failure, Sarah's world tilted. She had saved countless strangers, yet now she couldn't save the man who had taught her to care. Every evening after her shift, she drove to his small house in Cranston, a place filled with the scent of pinewood and framed photos of her childhood. "Hey kiddo," he greeted her one night from his recliner, his voice faint but warm. "Still saving the world?" Sarah smiled, sitting beside him, trying to. "Dad, you know the hospital named the new trauma unit after me?" He chuckled. "Yeah, I heard. Not bad for the girl who once fainted at the sight of her own blood." She laughed. "That was middle school. I've improved." But beneath their smiles lay an unspoken fear, the quiet understanding that time was running short. A month later, Sarah received an unexpected call from the Harvard Medical Research Institute. The director, Dr. Alan Price, spoke briskly. "Miss Johnson, we've followed your work and your advocacy for compassionate policy. We'd like to offer you a position as Associate Director of our new National Response Training Program. It's based in Boston. You'd train teams across the country in emergency and trauma readiness." Sarah's breath caught. It was an extraordinary opportunity, one that could amplify her work beyond Providence, but her father's condition had worsened. He needed her nearby. "Dr. Price, I'm honored," she said carefully, "but I'd need time to think." "Of course," he replied, "we'll hold the offer for 3 weeks." After hanging up, Sarah sat quietly in her office. Through the window, she watched snowflakes fall over the city she loved, the city that had given her purpose. That evening, she received a visitor, Judge Frank Caprio, now retired but still as sharp and warm as ever. He arrived at the hospital carrying 2 cups of hot cocoa. "Thought you could use a break," he said. Sarah smiled. "Judge, you always seem to show up when I'm about to fall apart." He grinned. "Occupational habit," Even retired judges know when someone's on trial, even if it's in their own heart. They sat together in the hospital's quiet courtyard, watching snow dust the magnolia trees. "I have an offer from Harvard," Sarah admitted softly. "It's everything I dreamed of. But my dad's sick. If I leave, I don't know if I'll get to say goodbye." Caprio nodded slowly. "I once faced something similar. Years ago, I was offered a federal judgeship, the dream of my career. But my father was ill. I stayed here. Some said it was a mistake. I never regretted it." "Why?" she asked. He looked up at the falling snow. "Because titles fade. Time doesn't come back." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what's right." He smiled gently. "The right choice is the one you can live with, not the one others applaud. You taught me that." Over the next few weeks, Sarah split her days between the ER and her father's bedside. She adjusted his oxygen, made him soup, read aloud from his favorite old firefighter journals. One night, he took her hand weakly. "You've done enough for everyone else. Sarah, promise me you'll live your life too." "I am," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Right here, with you." He smiled faintly. "You've always been my hero, kiddo." Long before any courtroom knew your name, he closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. The heart monitor by the bed beeped softly. Steady, fragile, beautiful. Sarah sat there all night, holding his hand. When morning came, the beeping stopped. Her father's face looked peaceful, and though grief wrapped itself around her chest, she also felt something else. Gratitude. She had been there, she hadn't left. She had chosen heart over ambition, just as he taught her. The entire city seemed to come to Robert Johnson's funeral. Firefighters, nurses, city officials, and even Judge Caprio attended. As the bagpipes played Amazing Grace, Sarah stood by the casket, her hands trembling. Mayor Keating approached her. "Your father was a good man, Sarah. He must be proud." She smiled sadly. "He was the reason I ever wanted to help people." When the ceremony ended, Judge Caprio placed a hand on her shoulder. "You gave him the greatest gift, your time." She nodded. "He gave me everything else." In the weeks that followed, Sarah found herself sifting through her father's old desk drawers. Amidst photographs and mementos, she discovered a sealed envelope addressed in his handwriting. "For Sarah, open when you're ready." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a short note. "Sarah, I always knew you'd change the world, but I hoped you'd never forget where your heart began. Don't chase greatness. Let it follow you. Love, Dad." She pressed the note to her chest, tears falling freely. A week later, she called Dr. Price at Harvard. "Dr. Price, thank you for the offer," she began softly. "But I'll have to decline. My work belongs here, in Providence. This is where compassion started for me." Dr. Price hesitated, then said, "I understand completely. Miss Johnson, the world needs people like you exactly where they are." After hanging up, Sarah felt a strange peace, not of loss, but of purpose. Life moved forward, as it always does. The hospital thrived under her leadership. The Sarah Johnson Emergency Medical Center became a national model for community trauma care. She continued her workshops, speaking at universities and nursing conferences, always ending her talks with her father's words, "Don't chase greatness. Let it follow you," and it did. The President of the United States eventually awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom for extraordinary humanitarian service. When she accepted, she said only one sentence: "Kindness isn't extraordinary, it's our duty." The audience erupted in applause. One bright spring morning, the hospital held its annual Heroes Among Us picnic, the same tradition that began after the accident years ago. All the familiar faces were there again. Michael and Jennifer Torres with little Jason, now a chatty toddler, Ruth and George Wilson, hand in hand. Richard Williams, with his teenagers, who now called Sarah Aunt Sarah. Even Mark Keller, the firefighter she'd saved, was there, walking strong and smiling. Judge Caprio, older but still full of warmth, sat on a bench beneath the trees. When Sarah approached, he looked up with a twinkle in his eyes. "Well, if it isn't Providence's eternal angel." She laughed softly. "Judge, you'll never let that nickname die, will you?" "Not as long as I'm alive," he said with a grin. They both looked around the park, the families laughing, the children running, the sunlight spilling through the branches. "Do you ever think," she asked, "what if I hadn't stopped that day?" He smiled. "I don't think about that. I think about what you taught the rest of us, because you did." She nodded slowly. "Sometimes I still hear the sirens in my head. That moment never really leaves you." He patted her hand. "Maybe it's not supposed to. Maybe it's how you remember what matters." As the picnic ended, Michael Torres stood to make an announcement. "Everyone, before we wrap up, we'd like to share something special," he said, holding his son Jason, now nearly 5 years old. "This little guy has a question for Nurse Sarah." Jason ran to her, holding a small velvet box. "Miss Sarah," he said shyly, "will you be my godmother?" The crowd gasped and cheered. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Jason, I would be honored." She hugged him tightly as the families applauded. That evening, as the park emptied, Sarah sat alone by the river. The water shimmered under the twilight. In the distance, the hospital lights glowed white. Her father's note still tucked inside her coat pocket. Judge Caprio walked up quietly behind her. "Beautiful night," he said. She smiled. "It is." They sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Caprio spoke softly. "You know, Sarah, I've spent a lifetime studying justice, but in the end, it was you who showed me what it really means." She turned toward him. "And what's that?" He smiled. "Justice isn't the law on paper. It's the compassion that lives in our choices." Sarah looked out at the river where it had all begun. "Then I guess we both did our jobs, Judge." He chuckled. "I'd say we did." Years later, children studying nursing at St. Mary Hospital would walk past the bronze statue in the lobby, a nurse kneeling beside a patient, with an inscription beneath it, "To Nurse Sarah Johnson, who proved that one act of kindness can heal a city." Visitors often left flowers or thank you notes at its base, and somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of a courtroom gavel still seemed to whisper through the halls. "Case dismissed." The end.